Okay, well, I might kick off. Welcome to the DAO Day session for Friday, the 16th of September. I think this is number 7 now. We've hit the ground running. There's lots to update on this week. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we all meet. But today I'm joining from the land of the Mulluridgee people, which is a place around Mareeba, far north Queensland. And Mareeba itself is an Aboriginal name, as I understand, that means the meeting of waters. So I'd also like to extend our respect to elders past, present and emerging. As we remind you, each DAO Day, the sessions are recorded. So if you have any issues now or subsequently with what you've provided or to be seen, please send an email to jp@lawfidao.com and we'll make sure to edit those parts out for you. Finally, I'd like to remind everybody of our values and beliefs, and that those are respect, reciprocity, integrity and kindness while doing things differently, and appreciating that time is our most precious resource. Forgive me, I'm a little stuttery today. I'm not well. And I guess that's one of the flaws of centralisation. I'm still putting the open call out for a spokesperson of LawFi DAO. And in the meantime, it's still me. Which I'm happy to do, but on the days when you're not feeling so well, it can be a little painful. So we might do a shorter one today, if that's okay with everybody, unless I can hand the baton for the community call. No pressure. So just in terms of what's been happening over this past week, as the lawyer, I have been fascinated to be doing some of the early engagement already. As the committee, we resolved earlier in the week to err on the cautious side of things and not accept any new membership applications. So this is to manage that regulatory risk of, in the event that the purposes of LawFi DAO are construed to be for the object or gain of our members, and that we wouldn't be a not-for-profit association. And that's, this is a federal law requirement, that if we have more than 20 members involved in the formation of that type of entity, then the persons involved in that formation can face strict liability and criminal liability, which is a very severe penalty. And it came up in our establishment committee session last week, and where we got to was that reasonable minds could differ. When you just look at the rules, the purposes in our rules as a standalone, it's quite clear that we have not-for-profit purposes. But now with the version 0.1 of the white paper, the pay-to-rely model really calls into question whether there is an object of gain for the members, and particularly also with the money token, if that could increase or decrease in value. Now, this exercise, it deliberately makes challenging design decisions, and based on what we see a lot in DAOs and DeFi already, so that we can test them, that LawFi DAO can be taking one for the team, but we don't have money or capital raised, so to speak. We don't have market cap to lose. So we're doing this quite purposefully and painfully slow to test things as early as we can with the regulators. Now, but reasonable minds do differ, and in the state and territory-based legislation, there are some exceptions to what pecuniary benefits members can enjoy. One of those is that they can be paid for the goods and services they provide to the association or through it. So if you look very closely at the pay-to-rely model, currently there is no clip of profit to the DAO that gets distributed to members. Perhaps we could, by vote, switch on later a revenue distribution from that fourth pool. but that is certainly not settled yet. And it doesn't have to be that members are the ones that stake a membership token or a money token to get a revenue distribution. All of that design is still up for discussion, and it's not clear at the time, or at least at the time of formation, or at the time where we might settle V1 of the white paper. That will come later down the track when the fourth pool, we get to making decisions around that aspect. So we're being very conservative, but in a number of white papers that they don't have any other governing document. So the white paper is what a regulator will look at as what are the rules of the association, or in lieu of a specific deed, is it the deed of a partnership or is it the deed of a trust? In our case, because we have these rules, based on my phone conversation with a representative from Consumer Affairs Victoria, that is the governing document that they look at. No other document is a governing document, including our white paper. So that in itself could be a strategic design decision to have some basic rules when a DAO launches, and negotiate, as we have through community discussion, what the actual activities of the DAO should be to advance those purposes. So we're at 47, and about 25 had paid as at the date that we resolved not to accept any further members. So I just want to make it very clear that if anybody who has applied to be a member and has paid up and feels that it is too much risk to bear, we will accept withdrawals or resignations from membership. We don't have the powers under our rules to make a decision on which members should cease to be members. And we did debate a little bit about whether the last 27 applicants just shouldn't be accepted, or that we should communicate with them in some way, but that didn't seem fair either. So we will put it in the hands of the members to decide whether they wish to continue at this time or not. Now, with that said, the feedback from Consumer Affairs Victoria, we will go through in detail in the establishment subcommittee, which commences at 9:15 today. So we can really get into the weeds and tear that apart and build on it in that session. We've also resolved as a committee to hold the first general meeting of members on the 14th of October, and the formal notice will be coming out by email shortly, as well as posted on social media. At the general meeting, we do need to pass some resolutions to support applying to Consumer Affairs Victoria to register as an incorporated association. And the purpose of doing that is so that we really can stress test the not-for-profit angle and whether we meet it. Once we have that resolution and a number of others that need to go along with it, then we can make that application. And we expect at least a month or two for Consumer Affairs Victoria to understand, talk with us, and then either decide that we can be registered or not. Now, this is a significant trade-off for LawFi DAO. We will not be a Web3 native DAO. In effort to attempt to be compliant, if we become a registered association, we will then have to fall within that reporting and disclosure regime. Also, but the experiment shows that there isn't a capability, a legally compliant capability to be a completely native Web3 DAO and be compliant with at least Australian law. Or maybe there will be a way which might eventuate once we go through the process with Consumer Affairs Victoria.
Hey, Jody, can I ask a question there? To what extent are you actually thinking now, actually, we've gone too far too fast?
Within 7 weeks.
We actually should be just a bunch of people around a table having a discussion first. Because to me, this is almost the most important part of the whole LawFi DAO thing, how it's structured. So to what extent are you actually thinking, well, actually, we should maybe stop having committee meetings or member discussion, just saying, let's make it more like a group of people having a chat before we actually try to do anything formal and test various avenues?
I think that's a great suggestion to put on the table. Absolutely. And I think we will essentially be doing that over these next 5 weeks or so, or really over the next 2 to 3 months, whilst memberships are cancelled and we can't advance as quickly as we would like to anyway. We have to really settle and rest into all of the different structuring conversations. One thing that Miles raised a couple of weeks ago, actually, and I think Andrew Walton supported this, forgive me if I'm recollecting wrong on this, but that over these next month and 2 months, we could pretend, in a sense, that LawFi DAO started as a cooperative or wanted to start as a cooperative or as a not-for-profit foundation or as a more complex, corporate structure that would reflect a typical way you structure a group or a multinational enterprise. And then each of those corporates is the delegate of parts of the DAO, and go very slowly to work through what LawFi DAO would have looked like to fit into each of those structuring alternatives. And that in itself is a learning exercise. So it means that we don't necessarily have all of the pay to rely or the membership token subcommittee discussions. We just purely now pull it back to the establishment work. So I think you're right. I think that's probably where we'll land, because we can't build a community around some of those other features until we get some regulatory feedback. Yeah, good point.
Okay. I'm just sort of concerned almost for your personal risk here, as much as anything.
I know, and that's, so we're trying to be as conservative as we can, and one of the reasons why I'm a member in the capacity as through my limited liability company, but equally you want to make sure that you're following all the rules that are applicable as you go through. And even as a lawyer, it's almost impossible. So unless I had the resources to have a fully staffed team with legal domain experts in a number of areas, it's very hard for a startup to be across all of those things.
And I think this is probably the interesting thing about whether you wind back membership and almost repay people and make it more of a bunch of people having a chat around a concept and test the various ways that you would like to structure it before you start taking money and put a formal legal structure in place.
Yeah, that's right. And we can refund membership monies too. So I can put that up for, or we can discuss it now as well. Is there anybody, I know it's a question or a comment without notice, so to speak, but if anybody has some ideas or immediate thoughts, either raise your hand or put yourself off mute. Or we can come back to it.
Yeah, I think, I similar to Greg. I think, it's about whose personal, your achievements in life today. If anyone's achievements in life today are going to be exposed to that being jeopardized, then I think that's what each member needs to think about. So I guess in our journey of looking to create a DAO, we decided to create a company in the end because we needed to get about doing business. But we thought, well, we can work on a DAO later. It doesn't have to be now. And the other thing was to, I remember in I think it was DAO Denver, there was a good conversation about, building a community first before a DAO. But then what does that look like? It's that question again. Are we a partnership? Are we just a collective of people talking about doing all these different things? Or are we acting as a partnership again? So they're hard questions.
Well, that's right. And I really struggled with that because all of that community building particularly from a tax perspective, what sort of deemed tax entities could it be, and what value accrues to that community? And when you start saying that you're a company first, and there's value that perhaps accrues to the community, almost like an intangible asset. When we talk about restructuring and then tax restructuring relief, does the community sit inside the company, or has it always sat outside? We don't understand the separateness. And even if you call it a DAO, like community building for the DAO, there's still no clear legal precedent that tells us what the indicators of separateness are. And so that's why from the get-go, it was my decision, and we need to critique it fully in the community, to start with an association and based on those rules, so that it's housed within something that lawyers and regulators understand, and we have that separate, or at least that clear identity from the beginning. But if I could have had my time again, we would have very clearly capped members at 20, so that there was no risk. And so it's not just to me, it's all of the persons involved in the formation. And that's at least 2 people when you're talking about an association, and it speaks of formation. So if you have joined as a member, but it was already formed, perhaps the liability doesn't extend to you. But yeah, I mean,
I think it's great that you're actually testing the model around exactly as you've explained. I think it's great that you're going in this test. I think, yeah, as a community, I mean, if it needs to be wound back and there is only 20 members, I'm sure there's 7 members that'll be happy to go, I don't have to be a member right now. We'll be members later in some form or another.
Yeah, and I think that's like from us, like we're happy to not be officially members. We're happy to participate in the discussion still, even if we're not registered as members. And I think if you find you need to roll back, I think you'll still get just about as many people on the call anyway.
Yeah, or bring in a waitlist concept, which I think was Arturo's contribution. Yeah. There's nothing more attractive than the club with a big line around the corner. Think with your words.
And I guess, does it roll back partly, go back partly to when the regulator thinks an association is formed? Like, is there a forming stage that you've got to be careful that, you know, collecting money from membership is obviously, you've done something, but when does a group of people having a chat around the table become an association?
Well, that's right. I'm not sure. Because if you don't have any document that says what the rules are of your associations, then it's very fluid, and they would have to look to a number of documents or the recordings, if they're available, to try and gather the facts to make that argument.
Yeah, and I mean, a group of people having a chat, I wouldn't have thought it's an association if they're testing and trialing ideas, but I don't know what the trigger is.
So I think the groups of people having a chat are probably at most risk of regulatory review when they're chatting about investments and those investment clubs. And so they're not even necessarily collecting money, but there's the giving and receiving of financial advice, and that each of those chat members are relying on to go and make their investments. So that may be the one that's coming into view earlier than other types of chat groups.
May I ask, what happens if you set up a group of, let's say, 50 people, and each one of them contributes with some sort of work, and that work may be a line of thought, and each one of those individuals receives either a token for their line of thought, which, you know, kind of says that, well, these people that have actually contributed get to be part of, well, maybe you don't say part of a group, but they get to benefit from the collective output of the work that has been done. Does that fall under any regulatory issue?
Forgive me, my feed might not be good. I heard only a few words of that, but The crux in Australia really comes down to the managed investment scheme definition and whether that contribution is money or money's worth. So giving them a token back may be money's, well, maybe in recognition of a money's worth contribution, and it's more risky if that token given in return represents or can fluctuate in value based on what all of the contributors are building and developing to that common project, which it finds its way in different expression in the Howey test in the US and the different regimes across Europe. So that's why you've always got to be careful around the contribution to a project and how you recognize that value. The DevCo approach with the early DeFi protocols is that they would build the software within a limited liability company, and they would raise capital through either the SAFTs or even equity capital, maybe even debt capital in some cases. But then all of the people were employed, you know, with compliant employment contracts, I would assume, to build the software, and then that's the DevCo deploys it and gives it to the world, and then it's governed by the DAO, however that model is construed, so that you don't have a token distribution or even token incentives until the thing is built, or at least V1. And where you distribute the token or raise money or get volunteer efforts beforehand, that can be seen as a speculative investment still. Sorry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
I
yeah,
only caught a few bits of it.
I wrote down a few things on the chat, but I think that if the risk is that the token could have value and is seen as a speculative object, if you make the token non-transferable, then that kills off that ability to even speculate on it.
Yeah, and that's, so I'm inclined to agree, and that's why the initial proposal for our time token is non-transferable. Yeah, so I do want to test it though, through, you know, when we finally get our tokenomics model reviewed at the state and territory level and then at the federal level. Yeah, great. All right, well, so just on that, for members as well as the general community to follow these experiments, I realized that what was lacking is the publishing of our artifacts. So Gordon, I think it might have been you mentioned that we could have a gitdocs or documentation, some of which is for comment, but perhaps some of it is just to simply view the emails that go between myself and the committee for approval when all of the membership applications were coming in, the basis, the reasons for the proposed resolutions of the committee, like all of that. I think if people want to spend the time looking at it, those are the artifacts of our journey, and they will include, you know, in the establishment committee meetings when we do some slide presentations on the available structuring options. Those are the things that people can view and access, and for some to comment on. I think it probably also makes sense for that to be a bit of the issues log for feedback on the white paper too, as we go through these weeks.
Sure. So
was that you, Gordon? Yeah.
Yeah. So that would probably normally be done in the forum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like some of those things. For the Git book, that was more about, I guess, just thinking a bit ahead about the onboarding. So building out the Git book, more just from a marketing perspective. So, you know, get just simple stuff like, you know, how to get ETH tokens and how to use your MetaMask, and just the standard things about if I was going to use LawFi DAO. So that was probably where I was coming from. And as we build it out, so this is the project, and it's the final doc page, the Git book. So yeah, I'm not sure about how you'd. I'd have to look into how this, or we'd have to look into what would be a forum space where you could post those things.
Well, we do have our Discord server Forgive me, Arturo, did you?
Yeah,
have an
no,
idea?
I think that there are two versions. One of them is a Discord server, as you said, where you could have an open conversation. Let's call it more of a dialogue. While as you can use GitHub to effectively write down the document, and then you can have a collaborative way of posting issues within the document and make amendments and see the change, track the changes and so forth, and see who's actually doing that change. One of the issues would be that you need to write in clear text, not in a binary document, as in Word documents would be quite tricky to use within Git. So it wouldn't be a pretty document necessarily, or unless you want to format. I guess there are tools where you can format in HTML or something like that to get a nice formatting. But the point is that you can have all of those changes tracked openly in a very, very structured way through GitHub while the conversation happens on Discord.
Yeah, and I mean, my favorite approach, I love the W3C group and how they have their whole structure about the working groups and how you contribute to their proposed standards, what's normative versus non-normative content. They're very sophisticated in how they go about, but I think they've got a bespoke website to show that whole journey, and all of the working group conversations, though, I think are effectively Chatham House, that the recordings or the artifacts of those discussions are not found somewhere else. You just can view on the website what the result of all of the working group reviews and discussions have been. So yeah, no, I'll take that on notice, Arturo, and maybe come back to both you and Gordon to work through what that looks like. So that was quite a bit on establishment, and necessarily so, as Greg points out. With our other subcommittees, with pay to rely, we have in our session today got on the agenda to go through the Open Zeppelin ERC20 standard, and from the perspective of fair, orderly and transparent operation of markets. So that goes to the principles of financial market infrastructure, as well as some of the legal things when a company lists and has its shares available for trading on a platform. We're going to critique that Open Zeppelin standard as sort of the high watermark for secure deployments of these fungible tokens, and go with each of these prompts and setting your own variables. What are the legal and markets, and even if we get some time, some tax considerations to think of when you're deploying your fungible token. Arturo and Vic, I think, will at least be in that call, as far as I know. The membership token, today we're going to try and go in a bit more detail around that art meets privacy concept. So we raised last week around each attribute of a person having its own symbol, recognizable symbol image. But that, even though a person may be comfortable for that to be outwardly represented to the public, could in itself still breach privacy requirements, particularly in Europe. And so the idea was that we want to massage is that those attributes and the symbols are still developed, but it's more of an internal product, and a person's image that you see once they hold their NFT membership token, that's the product of AI generated art that merges the symbols or the characteristics of each person. And to the extent that that member needs to be called up for a particular vote, that we experiment through those zero knowledge proofs and presentations on how we call upon our own membership body to have a representative vote. So finally, community building on the agenda today is trying to draft our first NFT children's storybook. So the people on the call have, or at least that registered since last week, have been thinking over the past week around how we might start, or the kind of plot that we might have for this storybook, and we'll be using our creative juices to see what we can come up with at the end of that one. And then we'll take that children's storybook through the process of technical, legal, you know, what are the things involved to get that kind of thing up and running. And our policy working groups, which also form part of the community building stream, we've got the next session on the UK Law Commission Digital Assets paper. This is chapters 14 and 15, which 14 is linking a crypto token to something else. So this is like real world assets. And then chapter 15 being about NFTs. Then the taxation of token activities working group today, we're focused on a brief recap of the Bedazzle submission to the UK HMRC tax treatment of DeFi staking and lending, and then a little bit on the Australian Treasury's exposure draft legislation for proposing Bitcoin and other digital currencies, what their considerations are for not treating them as a foreign currency for tax purposes. So that's it for the week past and what's on for DAO Day today. And in the week ahead, it will be quite firmly focused on the establishment issues and documentation and artifacts on gitdocs or the like, and how that issues log needs to be documented and addressed. So that's it for this week. I'll open it to the floor if there's any other ideas or topics for discussion today, or raise your hand if you'd like me to direct the conversation to you. I know we've had a bit of a discussion throughout today, so.
Just a note to anyone that can't be here, it's great to get the recordings from the other groups. So when you have a chance to keep abreast of what each other group's doing, it's pretty cool. So it's awesome that it's open and recorded.
Thanks, Gordon. Okay, great. Well, with that, I might make it an early mark and look forward to seeing you in any of the other DAO Day sessions today, otherwise online or in the sessions next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Joni.
Bye.